Are art museums sexist, or am I? I'm Behind the Gavel with Jason today. We're going to be talking about the gender disparity in museum holdings, and also we'll talk a little bit about galleries and auctions, secondary market and primary markets. And this is getting a lot of attention recently. In fact, I shared an article this week which prompted today's Behind the Gavel with Jason about this very topic. I'm just going to show this on my page real quick. Sure now. And the reason that, so the article was put out by an online art forum called Hyperallergic. I hadn't heard of them before, but I came across this article. They have 123,000 weekly subscribers, so it's a pretty big name. They have a lot of traction, especially they're based in New York, so that's, I think, where the majority of their readership is from. But they published an article this week about Williams College did a study, and it was a study, there was mathematicians, statisticians, academics, art historians. There was also a curator, a professor of arts, curator from the Williams College Museum, but also a professor from UCLA on African arts and artists. And they studied 18 major US museums, looking at over 9,000 unique artists and 10,000 pieces in particular. And I was curious, I did a little bit of more digging and see what museums they were talking about, just to get an idea of the flavor and where they were talking to. Detroit Institute of Arts, Metropolitan Museum of Arts in New York, Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the National Gallery of Art in DC, Philadelphia Museum of Art, Art Institute of Chicago, the High Museum of Art, the Nelson Atkins here in Kansas City, the Rhode Island School of Design Museum, Yale University Art Gallery, Dallas Museum of Art, Denver Museum of Art, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Museum of Contemporary Art in MoMA in New York, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. So it's a large pool, geographically diverse. And I think, I've been to several of those museums. They all have their own specific missions and strong suits, but a really wide range of galleries and museums across the country that is a pretty good indication of probably what most galleries and museums are going to represent. This article, this study concluded that, and they analyzed all of the names and works of art. Some artists were obviously very well known, others were obscure. Even major museums have obscure artists in their holdings. But they found, taking into account all kinds of variables, 85.4% were white, which is another conversation that we've had before and we'll again address in the future. But 87.4% of the works in those 18 major museums are by male artists. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. First and foremost, museums cover the history of art, and historically speaking, women have just not had the same opportunities as men in any professional endeavor, but even more so in the arts. And so it's hard to take an institution that's been around for 100, 200 years and has been collecting during that time frame. There just weren't works recognized and artists recognized, female artists recognized, historically speaking. It's only since the 70s and 80s that female participation in college and graduate studies have become, much more in line with population. Starting in the 80s, females have actually achieved and earned more graduate studies and degrees than men. And in fact, I wrote this down. I was kind of surprised. I did some quick studying. Since 1982, women have earned 13 million more college degrees than males in all degrees. That's all of them combined together. And of course, some are, the female representation is much larger than others, and men have in certain areas. But the bottom line is, women today in the last 40 years are much more active in the secondary education market, which has brought up their income levels and their powerfulness in the marketplace. And so that's what's going to happen going forward to change these historical institutions. You're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of years of history that you're trying to, you may never get to a 50-50 balance in a major museum because they just have thousands, if not tens of thousands of items in their inventory that, for thousands of years, there's just the quantity of female artists recognized just is minuscule compared to the amount of art that's available out there. So part of it is that there's an historical bias that will be almost impossible to overcome at a major museum. There are obviously museums being created with a focus on female artists and artists of color, and that's going to be really interesting to watch going forward. Will some of the major museums start to really take note and do some things like the Baltimore Museum of Art deassessed a handful of really great art, but all by white artists, white males, and they took those funds and they're using them to go directly for these areas of collecting and attribution and recognition that has been historically undervalued and underserved. And now the Baltimore Museum of Art, has publicly made it part of their mandate that they're going to be much more active in collecting works of art by females and works of art by artists of color. And that type of high-end direction will motivate, and it's caused conversation in the art market that you just didn't have even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And so that's what's going to change. There's some really interesting things that we came across of those museums. I mentioned in the study the 3 museums that had the largest percentage of female artists. The Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles has 24.9% female artists in their holdings, which makes sense. It's a contemporary art museum, and obviously women artists have been much more active in the contemporary fields than historically. San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, 18.1%. The Whitney Museum of American Art, 22.1%. So they've been actively considering this for a while now for that number to be that high for the Whitney. I wouldn't have expected that, but I don't know a whole lot about the Whitney. But I just know it's a staid and true program. On the other end, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, 7.3% of its works are by female artists. The Detroit Institute of Arts, 7.4%. Museum of Fine Art in Boston, 8.2% of their works are by female artists. So those are paltry numbers. You could get more. I mean, you should be able to have more works of art by female artists just on, randomly speaking. So those almost feel like they're excluding female artists from their holdings, which is part of the issue. The art world has always been much more who you know than what you do. And unfortunately, female artists have not been in these circles to be known by the curators and the collectors. And that is changing. Will continue to change, and hopefully as my boys get, as I get older and watch the markets change, these numbers will continue to grow more in a more healthy balance of male and female art and artwork of artists by color compared to the marketplace at large. Some other scary kind of numbers, though, that I found. I was doing a lot of digging into stats and studies on Artsy. A study of the galleries on Artsy said that 10% of the galleries had absolutely no women in their stock of artists, their inventory of artists. 10% of the galleries on Artsy had no female representation at all. 8%, only 8% had more women than men artists in their galleries, and 48% had less than 25% female artists in their gallery or stable of artists. Those numbers were really surprising to me, just based upon the numbers at large, as far as the women are doing more today in all fields, and especially the arts. Just today, more disturbing news in this conversation is that ArtNet published a story today that there was a study of galleries in London. These are current galleries that are opening, not museums, not auctions, but galleries open today representing art. 68% of artists in London's top galleries are men. And the Freelands Foundation has done many studies on this. The 88% of the secondary market are male artists. And again, that makes sense because the secondary market takes into account a painting that was bought at a gallery yesterday that there's a situation needs to be sold, but also the secondary market could be artists that are hundreds, if not thousands of years old. And so that disparity will probably always be in place for the secondary market. It's the primary market that's more concerning. Only 32% of galleries represent female artists. The other thing that's, I'm assuming, will change as population changes and as the graduates from the 80s and 90s are now looking at professional roles in the early 2000s. Teachers at colleges were 63% male staff, but 66% of the postgraduate applicants are females or women. That's an arts colleges in London. Now, on a good note, according to this another study, 55% of solo shows in Britain in various museums and non-commercial galleries were female artists in 2018. That's up from 39% in 2017. There was a couple of big museum shows that helped skew those numbers. It'll be interesting to see if those numbers stay kind of comparable. Any time that you're scheduling, you're going to have ebbs and flows of male and female artists of colors and white artists. And so I would think anything from 40 to 60% swing on an annual basis. If you can keep in that range, you're going to be doing pretty well as far as presenting works of art by female artists. Hopefully that continues in that same range. So what does that mean for you, for people who watch me and are buying and collecting and curating museums right now? I'm on a board of a little smaller art museum here in Missouri. I think it's important as a collector to recognize that there's more than likely going to be an increased interest in works of art by female artists and by artists of color. It just makes sense as those historically underrepresented and historically downtrodden segments of our society are gaining more and more positions of power and economic viability and economic strength that women and collectors. Jay-Z has a $30 million art collection, or $300 million art collection. I'm sorry, according to recent numbers. And so when segments of our population see that, when young men and women of color see superstars collecting art and collecting art of color, that's going to drive an entire region of the market. Swan Galleries New York has done a great job of offering this of works of art and historically black ephemera and pieces like that, and they've been doing those auctions for quite some time and have gained more and more attention and success each time they do it, which is a great thing long-term for the industry. It's bringing a lot of attention to it, and that there's value there and will continue to be value in that market. We're always excited about when we get great works of art by female artists and artists of color here in Kansas City at the KC Auction Company, working on a nice little collection of works by Fern Edie Connect right now, who's a 20th century artist who has had very little recognition historically, and is in a couple of museums, but hopefully that's going to change. So hopefully that's going to continue. I think it will. I think it's, I don't like to talk about buying art as an investment, but if that's an idea in your head, it might be something to keep in mind, because I think there's going to be a continued push as women and professionals of color become more and more part of the society's everyday just there. They're going to be becoming more and more active in those categories, in that role. So hopefully that continues. I think it will. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them here. Drop it on YouTube comments. You can send us a direct message on Facebook at our company page here. Drop us an email at info@kcauctioncompany.com. Letter K, letter C, auction company spelled out.com. Or give us a phone call at 816-283-3633. Happy to answer any of your questions about this topic or any others. We have a great auction online right now, and hopefully that continues to do well, and we have some great things coming up. Have any questions, let us know. We'll talk to you later. Have a great weekend.